How John Calvin, the religious reformer, helped shape capitalism. When people discuss the origins of modern capitalism, they often mention economists like Adam Smith or industrialists like Andrew Carnegie. But long before modern economics became a formal discipline, a religious reformer from the 16th century helped shape the moral and psychological foundation of capitalism. John Calvin. Calvin did not invent capitalism. He was not an economist, banker, or businessman. He was a theologian. Yet his teachings transformed how people thought about work, wealth, discipline, profit, and personal responsibility. These ideas became deeply connected to the development of capitalist societies, especially in Europe and later in America. To understand Calvin's influence, we need to look at religion, economics, and human behavior together. Who was John Calvin? John Calvin was born in 1509 in France during a period of major religious tension. Europe was dominated by the Catholic Church, which controlled much of religious and social life. Then came Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. Calvin became one of the most important second-generation Protestant reformers. His most famous work, Institutes of the Christian Religion, became one of the foundational texts of Protestant theology. He eventually settled in Geneva, where he built a disciplined Christian society based on strict moral codes, education, and religious governance. But what made Calvin historically unique was how his theology affected economics. The world before Calvin, medieval view of wealth. Before Calvin, medieval Christianity often viewed wealth with suspicion. Under the influence of thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, excessive profit was morally questionable. Charging interest, usury, was often condemned. Poverty was often seen as spiritually noble. Business was tolerated but not glorified. The ideal Christian life was often associated with monastic withdrawal, simplicity, and detachment from worldly gain. This created a cultural tension with commerce. Calvin helped change that. Calvin's radical shift, work as a divine calling. One of Calvin's most revolutionary ideas was the doctrine of calling, vocation. Before Protestantism, religious work was considered higher than ordinary labor. A priest, a merchant, a monk, a craftsman. Calvin challenged this hierarchy. He argued, every legitimate profession is a calling from God. That meant farming mattered, trading mattered, building mattered, managing money mattered. Work became sacred. This changed everything. A merchant was no longer spiritually inferior. Business became morally meaningful. This idea elevated productivity. People began treating labor as a moral duty. That is one pillar of capitalism. Predestination and psychological pressure. Calvin's theology emphasized predestination. This means God had already chosen who would be saved. Humans could not earn salvation through works. This created a psychological problem. How do you know if you are among the chosen? Calvin did not teach that wealth equals salvation, but many followers interpreted worldly success as a possible sign of divine favor. This created enormous internal motivation. People sought evidence of grace through hard work, discipline, moral living, productivity, success. This became a powerful engine of economic behavior. German sociologist Max Weber famously analyzed this in The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. Weber argued, Calvinism helped create the spirit of capitalism. Not capitalism itself, but the mindset behind it. Discipline, time, and efficiency. Capitalism requires discipline. Calvin promoted strict personal discipline. Avoid laziness, avoid waste, avoid luxury, use time wisely. Time became a moral resource. Wasting time became sinful. Productivity became virtuous. This aligns strongly with capitalist efficiency. In modern business language, time equals money. Calvin helped create that mentality. Saving instead of spending. Calvin discouraged extravagant consumption. If a Calvinist earned money, he was encouraged to save it, reinvest it, use it responsibly. This matters enormously. Capitalism grows through capital accumulation, not consumption alone. Savings become investments. Investments create expansion. Expansion creates economic growth. This pattern became common in Protestant regions, especially Netherlands, England, Scotland, later United States. Calvin and interest, usury. One of Calvin's most economically important reforms was his view on interest. For centuries, Christians largely condemned lending money for interest. Calvin softened this. He argued, interest is not inherently sinful if fair and ethical. This opened doors for banking, lending, investment, financial markets. This is critical for capitalism. Without credit systems, large-scale commerce is limited. Calvin helped normalize finance. That changed economic history. Literacy and economic development. Calvin insisted people should read scripture themselves. This meant literacy mattered. So Calvinist societies invested heavily in education. Literacy improves business records, contracts, trade, accounting, innovation. Higher literacy strengthened economic development. Economic growth often follows educational growth. Calvin indirectly helped both. Individual responsibility. Calvin emphasized personal accountability before God. This reinforced individualism. Capitalism depends heavily on individual agency, personal risk, personal ownership, personal ambition, personal accountability. Calvin strengthened the moral legitimacy of the individual economic actor. This helped weaken older feudal dependency systems. The Calvinist regions that became economic powers. Many heavily Calvinist societies later became commercial leaders. Netherlands. Dutch Calvinism helped shape one of the world's first advanced commercial economies. The Dutch East India Company became one of history's earliest multinational corporations. England. Puritan influence shaped business ethics and commercial expansion. United States. Many early settlers carried Calvinist ideas. These values deeply shaped American business culture. Hard work, saving, self-discipline, personal responsibility all became cultural norms. What Max Weber said. Weber's thesis is famous. Protestantism, especially Calvinism, encouraged capitalist behavior. Key ideas. Work is a calling. Profit can be morally acceptable. Discipline matters. Consumption should be restrained. Savings should be reinvested. This produces capital growth. Weber argued this ethic helped fuel modern capitalism. Not everyone agrees fully, but his thesis remains highly influential. Criticism of the Calvin-capitalism connection. Some historians argue capitalism existed before Calvin. Examples: Italian banking families like Cosimo de' Medici, merchant republics like Venice. That is true, capitalism's roots are older, but Calvin changed its moral legitimacy. He gave business a spiritual framework that was historically powerful. The dark side. Calvinist ethics also had side effects: excessive work culture, guilt around rest, obsession with productivity, wealth as moral superiority. Some modern hustle culture echoes Calvinist values, not always in healthy ways. Calvin's legacy today. Even in secular societies, Calvin's influence remains. Modern capitalist values often mirror Calvinist ethics: hard work, punctuality, discipline, reinvestment, long-term thinking, delayed gratification. Many people practice these values without religious belief, but historically, Calvin helped normalize them. Final analysis. John Calvin did not build stock markets. He did not invent corporations. He did not write economic theory. What he did was arguably more powerful. He changed the moral meaning of work. He transformed labor into calling, profit into responsibility, discipline into virtue, savings into stewardship, and success into a possible sign of divine order. Capitalism needed many ingredients: law, trade, technology, finance, property rights. But it also needed a mindset. Calvin helped create that mindset. That is why a theologian from the 1500s still matters in the story of modern capitalism.